Today we're going to be talking about some of the music theory behind Dark Chest of Wonders, one of my favorite Nightwish songs, right now on the spike signal. Let's start with the intro of the song. The song starts off in the key of A minor, and we're actually in E Phrygian of A minor, and we can tell that because we're starting on the E right here, which would be a flat 2 compared to E, therefore putting us in the Phrygian mode to give us a really dark sound. Eventually we get to this passage right here in measure 4, where we add a little bit of chromatic movement in order to make the song that much darker and more sinister sounding. We then get into the next part of the song where the drum groove becomes more consistent. We have a very similar thing going on here in this passage. Thomas is leveraging the E Phrygian key right here within A minor in order to make the song sound dark, not forgetting once again a little bit of chromaticism. And then Marco does this cool little lick in the bass, which basically outlines an E minor, except he adds in this sharp D, which almost gives it a little bit of a E harmonic minor sound, even though it's E Phrygian. Kind of interesting. We have very similar stuff here, except we're using chords instead of just single notes, and of course we bring in some choirs. The choirs basically follow along with the guitar, but we also have some accidentals thrown in here as well to add that little bit of extra darkness. Notice that the highest note in this choir passage over a couple measures is the E. That is to give a little bit of grounding to the choir line while at the same time having movement in the notes lower to that. For example, this D right here could actually be moved up an octave if you wanted to create a power chord type situation in the choir. It's not, it's a fourth below, which is basically a power chord inversion, you could think of it as. We observe him using a C here, as well as adding an E octave down to the choir as well. This makes everything sound very consistent while at the same time providing variation so the listener doesn't get bored. Moving along here, we have a little bit of rests, just to mix things up. We then bring in a violin that's doing some cool stuff. Here we can see just the violin part for this section. Once again, following along with the E very closely in two spots here and here, while also adding in that F sharp in order to make things sound a little bit dissonant. This F sharp here would usually denote the key of E minor, but since we still have a regular F sharp shown here, right here, that lower note, you could interpret this as still being from the key of A minor, E Phrygian specifically, but with an F sharp accidental just to make things sound a little bit darker. Although it's worth saying that this accidental F sharp is found so close to the key of A minor that it doesn't sound that dark or especially wrong. It sounds correct, just dark and intense. We now get to the transition right before the absolutely bombastic part that's super awesome. This right here on measure 17. It's almost like the song switches momentarily in this measure to the key of E minor because the Fs that were present before are now F sharps. So you could look at it that way or look at it as A minor with the accidental of F sharp, whatever your preference was. By my approximation, the best way to view this section is in the key of G minor. That's with two flats right here as can be seen. So we transpose backwards in the circle of fifths respectively, either by a major second or a minor third, depending on whether you view this key here as being an E minor or A minor respectively. The guitar and bass are hanging around the G this entire time except for the very last measure. Right here where they drop down to the flat 7 of the key of G minor, which means that we can interpret all of this movement as being from that. As can be seen here, we have these awesome lead movements which are starting on the G or on a note related to the G, here and here respectively, with these very powerful orchestral hits here. Doesn't sound great in Guitar Pro, but of course in the song it's very powerful. We then swap keys to what I would argue is the key of A minor. The guitar and bass are now hanging around the A note, the 1 of A minor, and the lead lines are now hanging around A as well. directly into the single measure transition on measure 26, I would then say that we transition to the key of E minor. As denoted by this F sharp right here, which is not an F, therefore indicating that we're in the key of E minor. Also, please note that this track right here called Brass Section is actually a bass clef tract. Just realize that. After the absolutely ingenious transition, we're pretty much hanging around E entirely for these two measures, showing more so that we are in the key of E minor. We have thirds of E played right here until the end, which is playing the second of E. And we have these lines up here, which is playing kind of around the E. The E's are here as well. Makes everything sound very consistent and nice, even though the guitar is moving around a little bit with chords and sequences and such like that. I personally view the next two measures as then being in the key of A minor because we're revolving around that, as well as the fact that we have an accidental right here for the F, further denoting that we are in the key of A minor. Tarja in her lead line, though, is still revolving around the E, which kind of could be a little bit of a callback to the fact that we were just in the key of E minor, trying to make things sound not so different, though we transpose to the key of A minor. Let's listen to the whole thing, keeping in mind the key change. And then it repeats. Very clean, very nice, and very interesting. Really keeps your attention without sounding like it's in an entirely different song, for sure. We then have another verse passage here, and then we get back into the bombastic part, which once again transitions into the key of G minor. Just like last time, G minor then gives way to A minor in the second part of the bombastic part. This is, by the way, the last time it's repeated in the song. The second time around of the bombastic part, the guitar is also following along with what the strings are doing to give this section of the song a very different texture than the first time it was repeated. We then have a repeat of the verse before finally getting into the chorus. We also have this great crescendo that kind of leads up to the chorus by leveraging the flat 7 right here. That'd be G major in the key of A minor to really pull you to that chorus.